Questions of Doom. Hello, welcome to another Questions of Doom. In this series, I attempt to answer questions which you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address as displayed on the channel homepage or indeed at the end of this video. Today I have been sent a question from, via the email address, from someone who's referred to themselves as Indiana Jones fan number 5. It's quite an interesting question actually, this one. Dear Archaeosoup, you would assume, would you not, that archaeology would become harder the further back in time you go. Is this the case? If not, please explain, because it is very counterintuitive. Yours sincerely, Indiana Jones fan number 5. Indiana Jones fan number 5. That is a fairly good point and question. You would think that archaeology would become harder the further back in time you go, if only because things are apparently more obscure the further back you go. Unfortunately, though, this isn't always the case, or rather, fortunately, this isn't always the case. First of all, yes, to a certain extent, archaeology is more difficult because there's less to go on when you go back in time. Often things have been weathered away or destroyed through time, and sometimes you do have less evidence because of it. However, some would argue that this actually frees you up. You're able to reconstruct worlds and posit ideas about past cultures, which you couldn't do if you had a whole load of evidence which was contradictory. Now that immediately makes some people very, very uncomfortable, especially people from the people who study rather the medieval period. But there is an irony here. You would think that the medieval period would be very, very easy archaeologically because there is just a fact there is more written evidence about people in the medieval period compared to people, say, for example, in the Neolithic. Unfortunately, though, this is where one of the big battles of archaeology takes place between people who study more recent times and people who study more distant times. Texts can be written with a bias, and an excellent example actually is there was one of my lecturers at uni was a medievalist, and he actually studied pins of all things. So he went down to a particular medieval dock where they said that they were importing so many tons of pins per year, and that these pins had been on the dock when the dock burned down, and the pins should be present. What they actually found was contraband wine, essentially, smashed up bottles and jars and jugs, which indicate that the document was incorrect. Now he believed this. He said, well, clearly the person who wrote this document was lying. They were trying to swizz the system. They were trying to get alcohol into the country or into the town without any tax being paid on it, or rather less tax because it was pins, ostensibly. But some of his colleagues were so convinced that the text itself had to be correct that they were willing and ready to discount the archaeology which had been uncovered. So sometimes texts you would think would make it easier, but actually sometimes they make it more difficult because they are written with bias, and sometimes they go directly against the archaeology which is uncovered. So that's what I mean by the contradictions. Sometimes it can be more difficult to deal with more recent times than it can be to deal with more distant times. And I suppose really this boils down to human error and human nature in archaeology. People, for whatever reason, always want to lie about something, whether it be about themselves, whether it be about where they're from. For better or worse, people often put a tint, a shade on reality, which suits them, and this is human nature. It seems that archaeology in the past actually is a little bit freer from that. We do occasionally see that, but the further back you go, the less individual bias there is in the evidence. So I suppose the short answer would be it's not actually as simple as more difficult when you go back in time, and easier when you come closer to our own times. There are so many complicating factors in archaeology that all periods have their own challenges. I can see why anyone would think actually that the further back you go, the more difficult it is, because you would think there's less evidence to go on. But as I say, sometimes the evidence itself can be a bit of a rod for our back, because some people are so determined that the evidence which is written down has to be true that reality sometimes begins to escape them. So it's really a bit of a juggling act, but as is all archaeology, and the act of interpretation itself is just that. It is it's a willful act to see, or in some cases not to see, as much of the truth as possible. So there we go. So hopefully that answer has been interesting and or useful to you, and hopefully in answering it via video, some other people out there in YouTube land will find this answer stimulating, if not interesting. So thank you very much for your question, Indiana Jones fan number 5. And if anyone else has any questions, please do feel free to email them in to me, and I shall answer them post haste. So until next time, thank you very much.